Hey everybody, this is Neil from the Overclocker magazine. So today I'm bringing you the Corsair 4000D Airflow chassis review. Now this is not just a normal review, this is actually me building into what would eventually be my video editing rig. So the components that are involved in this are not necessarily what I had planned initially. Through a series of unfortunate events, I didn't end up building a Ryzen-based machine, but I ended up going with a really nice Intel machine. And what was powering that Intel machine, so it's the EVGA Z390 dock, the Intel Core i9-9900K, and then you have the Corsair Dominator Platinum SE memory, and then you have the Asus TUF Gaming GeForce RTX 3080 actually. So you can actually see all of these reviews or read about these reviews in the descriptions below. Now, the centerpiece of this entire thing, or the things that I'll be focusing on here, is actually the case and building into this case, because that is what for me translates, or rather relates to you, what it's like living with the case, building into it, and basically what you'll get at the end, because all of those things come into whether I would recommend a case or not. I'll hopefully be able to relate all the things to you about this case that I like and the things that I don't like so much through the actual process of building into this case, which I must say was significantly easier than I thought it would be. Now, I've built hundreds of machines before, but this one, it was really easy. So anyway, without further waffle for me, here goes. This is what my experience was building my new video rig with the Corsair 4000D Airflow. Check it out. Starting with the back of the 4000D, we have 7 expansion slots, including 2 for a vertically installed GPU. Obviously, this is where your PSU goes, and this is the second of the 2 high airflow fans. On the inside, we have plenty of room catering for everything between mini ITX all the way to extended ATX, a PSU cover or shroud if you will, and of course we have what I call the primary intake fan at the front of the case. Moving to the front, we have this grille, which is what I assume distinguishes the airflow model from the regular 4000D. This grille, along with the air intakes on either side, allows plenty of air into the case. Tucked away on the other side are the case cables installed into a cable channel. In addition to these, we have 2.5 centimeters of clearance, which is plenty and awesome for a person like me who does zero cable management ever. We then have the standard cables for the USB Type-C, Type-A, audio reset, and of course the power button. This box obviously has all the cable ties, screws, straps, and everything else you might need to build into the case. Now, before going further with the case, this is the Corsair CX750F RGB, which powers the entire machine. The main selling point here is of course the RGB fan, which can be addressed via the motherboard software or by clicking the switch on the back to cycle through all the available colors. From here, I switched to the motherboard, installing memory, which for the first time made me realize that my options for installing the H115i Platinum were going to be limited. This motherboard, unlike others, has memory on the top or north side of the CPU, if you will. Before I could install the motherboard, however, I had to remove a small panel, which is used for cable routing and management. At this time, I was still hoping to put it back after installing the motherboard, but that was not meant to be because of this little USB header on the Z390 dock, which has a different orientation from the rest. However, that was the only extra step needed to install the board. The rest was fairly straightforward. With the board installed, I went on to plug in all the cables, routing them through all the available spaces. Even though I was using an extended ATX board for this, I had zero issues getting all the cables to go where they needed to go. There's a surprising amount of room within, given how small this case actually looks from the outside. With the cables installed, I then went on to try and mount the radiator at the top of the case, but as I mentioned earlier, the Z390 dock has DRAM located on the north side of the board, meaning this location was impossible. As such, I had no choice but to settle for the front of the case, where the radiator fans would pull air into the case and have the 2 packaged fans exhausted up and out. With only one option for cooler placement, it meant that there was an additional step required before I could mount the radiator in the case. I had to pull off the front panel, held in place via 2 screws at the bottom. During all of this is when I realized the front standoffs or feeds are actually attached to this front panel, and as such, if it looks like the case is leaning to one side or so, it's simply because the front panel had been removed. With the front off, I then went on to remove the case fans, which would eventually act as an extractor fan at the top of the 4000D. This also brings me to an issue I've always had with Corsair RGB hydrocooler units prior to the Elite series. The amount of cabling here was just so excessive and a definite no-no in that regard. Fortunately though, the Elite coolers have since come to the rescue. Now let's pause. I was so chuffed with myself for installing this cooler here that I easily forgot that I needed the fans to be against the panel rather than the radiator so I could actually see the lighting, but eventually I did it correctly, so it turned out all good. Remember the small panel I spoke of earlier, hoping to put it back into the case? Well, this is the reason I ended up not using it. This is the USB header on the board which prevented this from happening. Every other header on the board is actually parallel to the board, but no, this one had to be perpendicular for some reason. Why EVGA chose this orientation for this one particular header remains a mystery to me. Anyway, after installing the VGA card on the system was largely finished, or at least I was done with all the intricate parts that needed to be dealt with. So here's an odd one. When installing the CX750F RGB, for some reason the Corsair cells were facing upside down along with any labeling on the PSU case. Yet the mounting positions for the screws were the right way up, and of course for the lighting as well. Not a problem or an issue at all, but it's just one of those odd things concerning this entire build. After all this, the rig was almost complete. I'm pretty happy with how it came together, and I'm still surprised at just how quick the entire process was. But now it was time to deal with the mess of cables at the back. And my version of dealing with this is hiding it all in the back behind the panel. Super easy chassis to do this into, and it's almost made for people like myself. With everything essentially done, all I had to do was put the tempered glass cover back on, and the machine was essentially ready to use. It would have worked first time without issue had I realized that on this board you need to have the keyboard plugged in or it'll beep and not post at all. Once that was sorted, I have to say that it was plain sailing. I'm glad how this machine actually turned out, and even though it's not using the most cutting edge components, there are plenty fast for anything I can imagine I would want to use this machine for. This build is at present, or at least in terms of neatness, superior to my main machine, which is housed in the Crystal Series 680X. I couldn't have asked for this machine to turn out any better than it did, and once again this is among the easiest, quickest and simplest builds I've ever put together. For a case costing only $1,600, this turned out a lot better than it ever should have, and I'm so glad that I actually picked this case to build this machine into. So what can I tell you about building into the 4000D that you may not know? Well, it's one of the easiest cases to actually build your system into. When we talk about airflow, I mean, there's plenty of it. My temperatures are relatively low and even under load, right? And the thing that actually loads this machine more than anything else is the graphics card, not the CPU. So everything remains relatively cool. In fact, not relatively cool. This case, despite its size, actually runs just as cool as my 680X based system. So what can I tell you about this case that you didn't get to see? Well, there are some things that are not quite perfect about this case. There are these little screws that Corsair is using for attaching the panels. So these little screws have this little line. It's like lime in color, this little standoff that goes on the screw head itself. And when you actually use that, you find that it has difficulty making contact with the case. So I wasn't really a fan of that. But outside of that, I think everything else worked flawlessly. Yes, there are cases from Fentex and other competitors which cost a little bit less, but you're getting the Corsair quality here, the attention to detail and everything else that you tend to appreciate about Corsair products. So there you have it. That is my process of building my new video rig into the Corsair 4000D Airflow. Now naturally I didn't show you the machine doing any sort of number crunching or anything, and in fact I showed you the machine playing games and so forth. But hey man, if it's able to do this, then why not? Okay, if it's good enough to play games, then it certainly should be good enough to do any sort of video editing, encoding or transcoding that I might need to do. Anyway, let me know what you think. Share your comments below. Remember to share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.